What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Emily. Emily, why don't we just jump right into it, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Emily Hylton-Jean. I'm a clinical psychologist currently working in a large healthcare system on an outpatient basis, but they can move me around the hospital system. But for the past 2 years, I have primarily focused in my work on evidence-based treatments for PTSD and then also treatments for borderline personality disorder.
Well, yeah, and I would someday. I'm going to have you back on to dive more into borderline personality because I think
Hmm.
my mother had it has or armchair sort of diagnosed, and I have certain traits that that's I don't love, but that's for
Hmm.
another day. The
Hmm.
reason that I reached out to you is sort of the PTSD sort of anxiety piece of what you do, and I really wanted to hone in on that today. So can you first, let's define what is anxiety. What's the either your definition or the clinical definition?
Yeah, so anxiety is an emotion. Um, it can involve a sense of fear or dread or uneasiness, tension. It's all often in response to a perceived threat. And sometimes that's a really clear threat, right? So if I have to present in front of my colleagues, I could feel anxious because I'm afraid they'll have a negative perception of me, right? That's a clear threat. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes I might just wake up with this sense of dread or uneasiness and kind of feel anxious for the morning and not really know why. Um, but anxiety, like all emotions, it's neither inherently good nor bad. It does usually come along with a certain level of physiological arousal. So by that I mean like feeling kind of alert, on edge. Sometimes it can come along with reactions in your body, like your heart beating a little faster, muscle tension. For me, I feel it in my gut, like I feel like a tightness in my stomach. But we all experience it a little bit differently, but there's some clear commonalities in terms of the experience of anxiety.
Yeah, and so here's an example of why I keep an outline. Here's a rabbit hole. What do you do when you don't know what's causing the anxiety? Like, how do you approach that type of situation?
Yeah, so I recommend there's a cognitive skill that I think can be really helpful when that's the case. So we can go through that now, or we can go through it later. But I can jump straight to that if you think
Yeah,
it
let's
would
do that.
be
Yeah, let's
helpful.
go. Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of from cognitive therapy, and the idea is that a lot of times the anxiety is coming from a thought that you're having, or maybe a set of thoughts. And so for this exercise, it's really simple. All you need is like a piece of paper and a pencil. And if you already know you're feeling anxious, you're kind of a step ahead, right? Sometimes we have emotions and we don't know what emotion we're feeling. But if you've already been able to label it as anxiety, you've already kind of passed the first step in this exercise, which is to write down the emotion that you're having. And then I would recommend actually rating how intense it is. So like 100% being like the most anxiety you can ever imagine having, 0% being like you wouldn't be doing the exercise if you had
Is
0% anxiety.
is that because it allows you to sort of pause and check in, or what's the reason for that step?
Yes, but also because I want you to track it.
Hmm,
Okay.
makes
Track how
sense.
it changes.
Gotcha.
A lot of the reasons why anxiety can feel really uncomfortable and even scary is a lot of times it feels like it's just going to go up and up and up and up.
Hmm.
And that can kind of result in feelings of panic, actually, when it feels like the anxiety is not going to go anywhere, is only going to get worse. So actually putting a number on it is taking a pause to kind of assess the situation a little bit, but it actually allows you to then track it and figure out, is this just going to go up and go up and go up forever? Or is this eventually going to come back down,
Gotcha.
which it always does.
Sure. Yeah.
Eventually, not necessarily because of any given exercise, but the good thing and the bad thing about emotions is that they come and go. They're never permanent.
True.
So writing the emotion, writing down the rating, and then kind of jotting down the thoughts that are coming to mind. And sometimes there'll be a lot of them. Sometimes there's kind of immediately one that comes up. I usually think by the third or the fourth is when I've usually kind of hit on it for myself, like whatever's bothering me. But identify what that thought is, right? So if the thought is like, if we talk about presenting in front of colleagues, like they're going to be able to tell that I'm really nervous, right? Maybe that's the thought, or maybe it's I'm going to look like I'm incompetent, right? There's a lot of different thoughts that might be coming up, but identify that thought, write out the evidence for it. So bullet points, write out the evidence against it, and then write out a thought that is a little bit more balanced, that includes and acknowledges the evidence for it and the evidence against. So you're essentially like forcing yourself to come up with a new thought. And then rate your anxiety afterwards.
And what's the time frame? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Like what does this usually take, you think?
5 minutes. 5 minutes. And it's, sometimes there's really dramatic reductions, like 80% to 20%. Sometimes it's just like 5% or 10%, but to see that it's going down, right, that it's not going to go up and go up forever, can be really helpful.
Awesome. Okay. So back to the outline as discussed, and I'm sure we'll do this again for sure. How can you, so one of the things I think I mentioned in our back and forth a little bit in the emails was anxiety around future events, like picking up or dropping off your kid with a custody exchange situation. How do you lessen something that is coming? How do you lessen the anxiety around that?
Yeah. So one thing you're not always going to be able to, which is why I love that you have 2 questions about that. Like, how can you lessen it? How can you tolerate it if you can't? But when I hear lessen, I think of the idea of emotion regulation, right? So the idea that we can actually at times control how much emotion we're having, increase the positive ones, decrease the negative ones. And that's certainly true for anxiety, that's possible. There's kind of 3 main skills that I think are the most powerful for this. One is the one we just talked about. So checking your thoughts, evaluating your thoughts, particularly if you know that your anxiety is often driven by worries or by rumination, then that can bring that anxiety down. Now, I mentioned like coming up with a balanced thought, right? And sometimes that in itself will bring the emotion down. Sometimes you're going to do this exercise and realize that there's a lot of evidence for, like maybe much, much more evidence for than evidence against. And so in that case, you have a couple options. One is then like, how can I cope with it? Right. So if this kind of upsetting thing is happening, how can I cope with that? And if it is a situation, like if you do this exercise, there's a lot of evidence for it and you realize it's something that you can change, then I would say problem solve. Now, custody arrangements, you've probably already done a lot of problem solving to get to this point, right? And there's been potentially even legal involvement in that problem solving. So there may still be problem solving that's possible depending on the individual situation. But let's assume that like this is the arrangement we're at, and there's not much that can be done. So one other potential to bring the anxiety down is something called opposite action, or opposite to emotion action. So if we think about like that writing exercise being kind of the cognitive side of things, the cognitive ways that you can bring an emotion down, opposite action is like the behavioral side. Okay. And actually love this skill. It's one of my favorites because of how powerful it is. So opposite action, the idea is that if you're having an emotion and the urges that come along with that emotion are not helpful, then doing an action that's actually the opposite to that urge can actually decrease the emotion.
Okay. Yeah. Give me an example. I'm not smart enough to figure this one out.
Yeah. So with anxiety, the urge is usually to avoid
True.
in some form.
Yeah.
Okay.
Run
So
away.
like,
Hide.
yes. So let's talk about some general examples. We'll come back to the
Okay.
custody,
Sure.
seeing the kids. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I want you to kind of paint me a picture for that.
Sure.
That's okay. But so let's just say like putting off studying for a test. I feel anxious about the exam. I don't like that feeling. I'm going to procrastinate.
Okay.
Okay. And then what happens to the anxiety?
Well, eventually it increases because you're not actually doing anything to take care of the original problem, which is being prepared for the test, right?
Right. Absolutely. And even actually, so that one's really obvious. Like if I don't prepare for my test, the anxiety is going to go up because the
Right.
test is coming closer and I'm no more prepared.
Right.
But even something like, say a friend invited me to like a support group or a book club that meets every week.
Yeah.
And I want to go. Like I think it sounds good. Like I think it would be helpful for me. And then the day comes around and I'm feeling kind of anxious at the idea of going for the first time. And so I have that urge to avoid and to cancel, like let them know that I'm sick or something came up with work. And let's say I do, like I give into that urge. I'm going to feel better, like, probably pretty immediately. That anxiety is going to go away. But similarly, the anxiety is still there and it's going to come back next week when it's time for the book club again or it's time for the support group again.
Right.
And we also know in that case, the anxiety tends to get worse. So the more we avoid, we kind of reinforce this idea that whatever we're avoiding is actually dangerous. And so the fear conditioning actually increases. So it actually tends to get worse over time in the long run, rather than staying the same. So opposite action is doing, for anxiety, is often doing the opposite of whatever you're wanting to avoid. And in some cases, that might just be like, well, actually, paint me a picture. Give me a scenario of like someone who's about to see their kids because of a custody arrangement and what they might be anxious about.
Yeah, I mean,
from the guys that you talk to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm 5 years out, so I don't have that issue or situation or scenario anymore. But I certainly did, so I definitely can speak to it. So, there's so much hurt and pain around that breaking apart of a family, and it's, I want to say it's caused by one person, and that sounds like I'm blaming completely, but I'm not, because I had my fault. But that one person walked away, left, however you want to describe it. She made the decision to leave, and it is what it is. But you have to then interact with that person in a way that is good for the children, not harming yourself in terms of doing something out of anger, and it affects your ability to have custody of your children. So it's you also love that person and still wish that she wasn't gone. And so there's all of this just ball of emotions that it's easier to avoid. And so when you're making that last right turn to go to her apartment, and you feel this just dread and anger, and it's just everything. It's not one emotion. It's everything. And you'd rather, in some ways, although again, there's also a little bit of happiness in some ways, because you are going to get to see your children, which is the best part of that scenario, that scenario, or that exchange, or whatever you want to call it. So it's every single fucking emotion, I think, that you can feel, you do feel. So yeah, that's what you feel. All of it, everything.
Yeah. And sometimes anxiety is kind of a secondary emotion in the sense that I'm actually having anxiety about the pain I'm about to feel. Like I know I'm going to be in some level of emotional pain. It might be anger, it might be sadness, it might be grief.
Yes.
Betrayal, right? Like,
Yes.
but I know I'm going to have those feelings come up, and I'm actually anxious about the experience of having those.
100,000% yes. Yeah.
And so part of like the more those are avoided, and obviously there's a problem with avoiding it altogether because then you don't see your kids, right?
Yes.
And the whole point of this exercise is to see your kids.
Yes.
That's the whole reason you're going there.
Yes.
And there's a value around seeing your kids, right? Those are people who are incredibly important to you. But then also, like, let's say that you could somehow see your kids and avoid that. Like, you know, you make her drop them off at a second location and then you go see them. And I know sometimes that is involved in the arrangement, but that's
Sure.
not in this one, right?
No.
Avoiding those emotions would still reinforce the idea that it's actually dangerous to have those emotions. And it's actually not dangerous to have those emotions.
As a man, and I'm sure other people, other genders, females. But as a man, I would disagree. Now, I've gone through a lot of growth, and I could say that I don't disagree now. But in the beginning, I was like, no, those emotions are absolutely dangerous. I don't want to deal with them at all. I don't want to feel them. I wish they'd just go away.
So urges that come along with those emotions, if they're engaged in, can be dangerous.
True.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so they can go along with behaviors that are truly, by definition, dangerous. But the emotion itself, like having that feeling of the emotion, isn't dangerous. And we can't actually learn that until we go through it and have those emotions and see that we can get on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And the irony is that the more we avoid them, the more that they're scary, right? They feel dangerous. And actually the more intense they are when you do experience them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a counterintuitive thing. You need to lean
into. It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah.
And so that's actually the second opposite action for anxiety. So there's one, which is actually just doing whatever activity that you want to avoid or whatever it is.
So I guess in that scenario, it would be like, go up and talk to her, not in a deep conversation kind of way. Just, hey, here for the kids, small, right? But something, right? So you're not avoiding. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So intentionally engaging, right? Another thing though, for anxiety though, because it's an emotion that so many of us do not like to have, right? It's definitely not my favorite emotion. Sure. A lot of times we're really focused on making it go away. And I will give you some, talk about some skills to not necessarily make it go away, but to take the edge off temporarily. So that's coming. But the more we try to make it go away, just like with those other painful emotions, the more we reinforce the idea that having anxiety is dangerous, which makes it more intense in the long run. So another opposite action for anxiety would actually be to just let yourself sit with it for a little bit and watch it. Watch how it goes up and it actually comes back down on its own. Don't have to do anything to make it go away. It will eventually go away. Might be hours, but it will eventually go away. So one of the most powerful things we can do to decrease anxiety in the long term, right? So if we think about like having episodes of anxiety, or if you're going to see your kids every week, you're going to feel anxious every time to some extent. In the long term, if you can just kind of sit with it and watch it eventually go away, that power will start to go down. And the intensity of the experience of having it, just like we were talking about, will start to go down.
And is that sort of, because we're going to sort of talk about also not only sort of lessening it before, but also being able to tolerate stressful, anxiety, potentially filled interactions so that it becomes, I guess, tolerable. I don't want to say easier, but it certainly becomes tolerable. So is that sort of, is that what you need to do then? Is that, or how do you get to that point? How do you learn to tolerate?
Of tolerating?
Yeah.
Well, first, like, I want to actually go back a second when I said emotions are not dangerous, but some of the urges and the behaviors are. And even if we take danger off the table,
Sure.
when we're really anxious or have other emotions like anger, for example, we are absolutely liable to say, do things that we regret later. And sometimes that's just like lashing out verbally or
Yeah.
saying something that you don't actually want to say to this person who co-parents your kids, or not wanting to say something in front of the kids.
Yeah.
So there are some tools that I would mention here.
Okay.
If you feel like the anxiety is getting high, or the sense of that physical arousal that I was talking about, heart beating fast, like, uh, breath quick, like feeling you can't quite catch your breath. Some of those signs that like, oh, I might do something that I regret right now. There are some like really helpful tools to use to bring that down. And and stop me if this is something that like folks have talked about extensively on the podcast already. Move me forward. I definitely want to make sure that the time has been used well.
Yeah. No
But if folks are familiar, we have like kind of taken us back to, I don't know, middle school biology, but we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system,
Yep.
right? And the sympathetic nervous system is all about survival. We activate our fight or flight response. The level of arousal increases when there's some sort of perceived threat. Okay. And that's when you're going to get those responses in your body, like, muscle tension, your body temperature might go up,
Right.
heart beating fast, etc.
Yep.
Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is what decreases the emotional arousal. It's like a calm state. If we have like the tagline of sympathetic is fight or flight, parasympathetic, it's rest and digest. So we fall asleep more easily, then we can digest our food, all of the kind of day-to-day functioning that we need when we're predominantly in the parasympathetic nervous system. So one super powerful way to kind of tip back over from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system is with cold water. So, and specifically putting cold water in your face for 30 to 60 seconds. And the reason for that is that we are mammals, and all mammals have something called the dive reflex. And the dive reflex is kind of works the opposite of fight or flight, right? Fight or flight, the reason why your heart is beating fast is it's trying to pump blood with oxygen to your extremities, so you can like fight off an attacker, run away, whatever you need to do. Dive reflex is so that if any mammal is submerged in really cold water, we can survive longer with less oxygen. And so our heart rate actually slows down, so it doesn't beat quite as fast because you're trying to preserve oxygen, stay alive in those conditions longer. So you can actually harness this. And the cool thing is that you don't have to take an ice bath with your head underwater or anything like that. The receptors for the dive reflex are actually here. So for folks who are not watching, it's like kind of in your upper cheekbones, underneath your eyes, into your temples, and even like a little bit above your eyes, like around your brow. So all you have to do is have cold water in that area, and your dive reflex will engage. So you can fill a bowl with cold water, put a couple ice cubes in there, and just put your head in. Technically they say 30 to 60 seconds. I would always say 60. It seems to get more and more powerful with every additional second. You can also do it with like an ice pack. So like we keep in the house an ice pack that you can use for like muscular injuries. So it's, flexible. That's a great thing to do, to put it over your face. It is marked, the decrease that you'll feel afterwards. So that's one thing. If you know that you're going to go pick up the kids, do that before you leave to kind of bring a calmer state on as you're driving to go do it. If you have a longer drive, like if you're in a situation where you're driving a couple hours, put it in a one of those like lunch boxes, right? You can put an ice pack in like a insulated lunch box. You can take that to work. There's all sorts of situations you could use that in. Nice. So that's a good one. Other ways, pace breathing. So slowing down the exhale, there's a lot of different ways people teach breathing exercises, but if you want to go, tip back again from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic, the only thing you need to focus on is slowing down the exhale. The exhale needs to be slower than the inhale.
What's the mechanism there, or what's at work? What's at play?
Yeah, so it actually engages the vagus nerve.
Okay.
And that's, part of this whole feedback loop. And so slowing down the exhale, some people count. That stresses me out personally. And I know for folks who tend to have anxiety, that can be the case. So what I usually tell my patients is just do a normal inhale and then slow down your exhale and do it for like 5 minutes. So set a timer.
Okay.
Intense exercise also works. So the mechanism there is, you have all this oxygen going to your through your system. You specifically need to do aerobic exercise, right? So aerobic means by definition with oxygen, right? You're getting your heart rate up and keeping it up. So 20 to 30 minutes of aerobic exercise will also kind of calm down the system. That one obviously is not necessarily quite as easy to do. Like it's not like you can just pause, let me go for a run, right? But if you can plan it into your day, right? If you know that you have something coming up that you might feel anxious about. And then the last one is progressive muscle relaxation. So that one is working with muscle tension, essentially. When we tense muscles more, when we tense them up before we relax them, we actually get a deeper relaxation. So progressive muscle relaxation is just you tense up different muscle groups for 10 seconds, and then you relax it for 20 seconds. And you do that, go through different muscle groups. You can just put it into YouTube, progressive muscle relaxation, and you'll see people kind of leading you through. But the concept is pretty simple. You tense up the muscle group for 10 seconds, relax it for 20.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that one. That's cool. I'll have to check it out.
And all of those, except the intense exercise, don't do that one before bed because that'll bring up your core body temperature when it wants to go down before you sleep. But the other three are also great before you sleep. So if there's any sort of anticipatory anxiety about like, okay, I know this is coming tomorrow, and kind of wakefulness as a result, or tossing and turning, doing any combination of those other three, the water in your face, the progressive muscle relaxation, and the paced breathing are excellent for bringing on sleepiness and bringing that arousal level down.
Gotcha. Okay. So is it those are the big ones? Is then the other question, I guess, is, how do you tolerate it if it's something that continually happens, like a custody exchange?
Yeah. So also for tolerating, another thing that you can do, so say you've brought the level down and now you're going and you're still in distress, right? Soothing. So using self-soothing. A sort of shortcut to doing that is also through the senses. So thinking about your 5 different senses and what is soothing to you from each of those senses. So some of that you might be able to do in the moment, like in the car ride over, or even while you're there. And some of that it might be afterwards, to kind of, knowing that you're going to be able to soothe yourself afterwards, right? That can kind of help you tolerate it. Like, I'm going to get through this, and then when I go home, I'm going to do these things to soothe myself. Those are very person specific in a lot of ways. Like, so if we think about the senses, vision, right? So starting with vision, for me, like, it's very soothing to watch like garden and landscaping transformations when people like show what they did with their landscaping. So I can watch those videos and know that that is going to kind of bring me down, soothe me a little bit. But for someone else, it might be something entirely different. Going outside too, that's soothing to me. So seeing the outdoors. So hearing, right? Certain music I know is going to be soothing to me. Putting on a podcast, right? Depending on the podcast, of course. Right. Some are interesting but not soothing. Outdoor sounds, those are types of things that can be soothing. Certain smells can be soothing, right? Whether it's like like coconut or lavender, or it's a certain like fragrance or candle, right? Um, so knowing what smells are soothing, certain tastes. With taste, I would just keep in mind like we want it to be soothing in a way that is helpful and healthy, right? Not
Right.
a binging sort of situation, but it
Right.
might be like a certain tea or yeah, hard candy, something like that.
Right.
Um, and then what did I miss? Oh, touch.
Mm.
So some, it might be bringing something that like wearing a shirt that's super comfortable. I know that
Gotcha.
sounds silly, but even something like that can be soothing, or knowing you're going home to clean sheets on your bed.
Right.
It's going to feel really good to climb into. So these things are distress tolerance tactics like this.
Mm.
It's not going to bring down the level of pain in the moment. Okay.
Mm.
However, knowing it's there and being able to use it might help you get through that period of time without doing something that might make the situation worse, or might actually increase the experience of that emotion in a way that would actually cause more distress.
It isn't it a matter of sort of training your brain that like ultimately it's okay. Like if each time
Mhm,
you go through something like that, you soothe
mhm.
yourself. Isn't that sort of teaching your brain that like, yeah, we're okay. We can survive
Yes,
this. Gotcha.
absolutely. And so that's kind of gets to the third thing I was going to say for this, which is willingness, like the
Mm.
concept of willingness. Um, and I think about that as like sort of being willing to do what you need to do or experience what you're going to have to experience to live within your values or to be effective, right? That's another way of thinking about it. And so, with the example we're talking about, like if you're going to have to be around this person in order to see your kids, and if these emotions are going to come up because you're around this person, being willing and acknowledging to yourself, like, okay, I know I'm going to go through this and I'm willing to do it because I want to see these kids. And that combined with the learning that happens, so the fear deconditioning essentially that happens, that is part of what's going to make the emotion go down in the long run or not be quite as distressing.
So as a man,
Mm-hmm.
I always ask, and I think all of us do this, and probably some women too. I try not to generalize, but I do. How long
Mm-hmm.
is it going to take for me to master all these skills? Like, when can I put on my
Oh,
calendar if I start working on it? When will I be done?
your whole life. You're going to use
Oh,
these skills your whole life.
yes.
This is part of just it existing, right? Like in
Sure.
terms of like we constantly have to regulate our emotions,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think I think things do get easier with time. I actually wanted to pause and ask you. You said something about I can't remember how many. Did you say you're 7 years out
5.
from your divorce? 5 years out.
5.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
And you said like this is something I would have experienced before and not so much
Mhm.
anymore. Why don't you don't have to go into a lot of personal details, but kind of
Oh,
generally speaking, why don't you experience it anymore? Like
uh,
why is it
yeah.
not the same as day one?
Personal details are what I do.
Okay.
I a combination of things. But I think the biggest one is I didn't want anyone else to be in control of myself and my emotions. So, in other words, I didn't want her presence to affect my outlook on life or my day or my minutes or whatever, and
Hmm.
I'm not saying that I'm totally clean, but generally I'm definitely, I'm certainly not like I was, but the motivation to to not have her affect me, and other people still do, and life will throw you curveballs, and I think that's why you said your whole life, because you can prepare for being around her, and then you get a boss who does this thing, or a
Yeah.
customer or
Yeah.
whatever, right? And
Hmm.
so, but that was probably one of the bigger things is I didn't want her to dictate my day, my life, essentially. And then the other thing is, I wanted to be who I wanted to be, if that makes sense. Like I didn't want to be an angry, pissed off, bitter guy. I didn't want to be
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want
Mm-hmm.
to. And so those are the two big ones. I wanted to be the best me I could be, as cheesy as that sounds. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I couldn't be if I was being angry every time I interacted with her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's people say this often, time heals and it takes time and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about this a lot, and I say this a lot, or I haven't said this a lot, but I've really been thinking about this a lot. It's not time. Well, I think what time allows you is the ability to process these things to improve. It's not just time. You can't just sit around with your thumb up your ass hoping that it'll get
Mm-hmm.
better.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen. But time
Yeah.
and practice and willingness, like you said, does allow for, the greater time you have, the more chances you have to improve on these things. And so it's taken
Mm-hmm.
a lot of work. And I mean, I've had dinner with her. I mean, not one on one, but like with the kids and stuff. Like I've been around her. She comes into my home where
Mm-hmm.
when it initially happened, she wasn't even, you can't even come in my driveway. Like I was just so bitter
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
angry. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be that way. So yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So if I understand correctly, it's like the some of the other emotions went down, like the anger,
sure.
because of sort of your intentional way of approaching it.
Yeah, and I wanted to get to the root of it too, because it's not really, I always sort of look at anger or think about anger as a masking emotion. Like you sort of said about
Uh-huh.
anxiety, it's
Secondary
secondary.
emotion, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not the root of the problem.
Almost always, yeah.
It's my inability to not handle the pain that
Mm-hmm.
and turn it into anger
Mm-hmm.
is because I can't process the pain. And so again,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to do, I don't know, the right things, or I didn't want to be beholden to anything that was in control of me. I wanted to be able
Mm-hmm.
to decide my outlook, my day, my disposition, whatever, and not have the out. No, again, it's not a perfection. I'm not, and
Yeah.
that'll never happen. But I'm much better at regulating my emotions. Period.
Yeah. Yeah. Has anyone in the podcast or you ever discussed radical acceptance, the idea of radical acceptance?
I think, yeah, for sure. I think Dr. MC
Yeah.
McDonald, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She wrote a great book called Unbroken. She's a
Okay.
wonderful, wonderful human. She's a trauma researcher.
Uh-huh.
And I believe maybe in her first episode we talked about radical acceptance, I think. But yeah,
Okay.
but I mean
Awesome.
we can certainly touch on it again because I think it is a relevant. I think it's one of the things that it's sort of around that I lean on it often is what can I control. And like we were having
Yeah.
this discussion in the support group this morning. Someone was saying it really bothers me that she won't change her name back. She's keeping my last name. And
Mm,
I initially was the same way. I was like,
mm,
she should change her name. She doesn't deserve my name. Like all the things.
uh-huh.
But then you get to the point, and I think it's part of the process too. But it's like, can I control that?
Mm-hmm.
Can I make her change that? No, I can't. So again,
Yeah.
you radically it's just that it
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Accepting reality as it is, right? And so much pain comes from not accepting reality as it
Mm,
is. And that doesn't mean that we are saying that it's fair or that it's right,
correct.
right? That doesn't mean that we're condoning what the reality is,
No.
but arguably, you can't really change anything unless you've accepted that reality. And then there are things that you can't change, right? So if there are
Yeah.
things that you can't change anyways, then accepting that as reality, it's keeps pain from leading to suffering.
Yeah, and I think a large part of our life is that way, right? There's so much
Mhm,
that we can't control, except
mhm,
for our reaction to it. And that's one of those things that I think eventually, when you learn how to sort of embrace the true emotions, then you can get to
mhm,
things like that, right? When if you can really deal with
mhm,
pain instead of anger, then it's like then you become truthful about what the situation is, and
mhm,
so you can feel the pain and experience the pain, and then realize like there ain't anything I can't do anything about this. So I'm feeling it, I'm experiencing it, but
mhm,
I'm not running from it, and I'm being true and I'm being
mhm,
honest, And then at that point, you're the one in control. Now, none of that is easy. None of that is pain-free or fair. No, but I do think that that's the best way, because life is always going to find a way to kick you when you're down, or to push you down and to beat you down. It just, it happens. And I'd rather be able to weather those storms and come out them a lot quicker, rather than sort of, dwell in them.
Yeah. What's the line from Princess Bride? Like, life is pain, princess. Anyone who tells you other is trying to sell something.
Exactly.
And that's why I'm glad that you had brought up in our planning for today, when we were deciding what to discuss, the idea of distress tolerance, because there are painful moments in life, even if you've already gotten through them and they've gotten better, right? Each of us are still going to experience pain in life. And so feeling like you have an idea of what to do, or skills or concepts to use to get through those moments, I think is important, in addition to hopefully having some to change emotions.
Yeah, for sure. No, I 100% agree. I feel like we could talk forever, 'cause I'm really enjoying this, but it is 4:47, and I don't want to keep it too long. I could definitely go down a rabbit hole of borderline personality disorder, but I'll save that for
Me
another
too.
time. I'll definitely save that for another time. So I'm just gonna well, first let's cover, like, how can people find you? I think it's psychologytoday.com, but do you have a website or anything of that nature?
I don't have a website. The blog on Psychology Today, you can Google my name, or I think it's called Mapping Your Mental Health Journey. I have a Instagram that I don't use a ton, but it's Psych Data for All. Hopefully I'll revive it at some point. And then I'm on LinkedIn too, under my name.
Gotcha. So the last question that I ask everyone is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man just starting his divorce journey?
Yeah, so I'm going to get a little meta with this one.
I like it.
So one of the therapies that I provide is called dialectical behavioral therapy, and actually was developed for borderline personality disorder. And in DBT, although it's been used for many, many other things at this point, but in DBT, there's this idea that we have 3 different states of mind that we all go into at different times. We all have all of them. We all go into all of them as well. So on one hand, there's reasonable mind. So that's like guided by reason, logic, emotions and values are not important when you're in reasonable mind. Then you have emotion mind. And emotion mind is when emotions are in the driver's seat and we're kind of just along for the ride.
Right.
And reason and logic aren't really playing a role. No. But then at the intersection of these two sits wise mind. Okay. And wise mind takes into account reason and logic, and it takes into account emotions, and it synthesizes them into a middle path. And as a therapist, as a clinician, I do not need to teach anyone to have wise mind, because we all have it.
Sure. It's
the wisdom within each of us, but sometimes we ignore it. So my advice would be, don't ignore your wise mind. And the process of divorce and the pain that comes from it is going to pull for emotion mind. Quite a bit, probably. And then if it's not pulling for emotion mind, it might be pulling for reasonable mind to try to get out of emotion mind. Right. And there's a place for each of those. So at times it's good to be in each of those. But my advice would be, don't make decisions out of those. Make those out of wise mind. Now, when you're at major crossroads and tough moments and these painful moments of life, go into wise mind.
Wow, excellent advice. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching and/or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.